Okay, dear colleagues, we're happy to meet you in this panel, and this is a panel about environmental issues and the BRICS plus countries. Just short brief. The thing that sustainable development, including environmental harmony and social responsibility, has become a trendy concept recently, and gathering states, businesses, and people around the idea of responsibility to future generations. Unfortunately, the concept is not yet the nature and natural so that every person of understands it and relates to it. This is why the role of governments and international institutions is so waste of promotion, and this idea is very important. We decided today to discuss the ways of making it real, first of all, and the second one, to make it not so different for different countries. You see, so we try to say that we need to find something specific and really all the countries, all the BRICS countries, but also we try to find some prospects to make it not so difficult for the countries to find something general. So I'm happy to invite to the floor, to our virtual floor, senior lecturer at Hong Kong Metropolitan University, Pooja Shukla, and the floor is yours, dear colleague.
Thank you, Professor Julia. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for giving me the time and the opportunity to share my views on the on ESG and BRICS Plus. I'm just trying to share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Actually, we can't, but I'm trying to go to the help desk.
Okay. Okay, I think now you can?
Yeah, it's okay. Wonderful. You can start.
Okay, great. Thank you. So to begin with, a brief introduction of what ESG actually is. So environmental, social, and governance. It includes positions like carbon emissions, your water resources, what type of electronic waste you might have, what clean and green energy or technology you might be investing in, social issues like labor management, product safety, supply chains, etc. And governance is basically anything from diversity to your boardroom dynamics to executive pay, listing rules, maybe, for example. Starting with the latest news. So I just read this 2 days ago where it said that Pepsi is pushing their 2040 targets by 10 years, that is for 2050. I also read that UBS is pushing their targets by 10 years. And then there was Australian court which fined another company a big fine for greenwashing ESG investment claims. So, what is the bottom line? What is the crux of all these headlines? I think the biggest problem that we are facing in BRICS plus countries is that we have taken this pledge of net zero too soon. And this pledge was taken under probably peer pressure, and it was probably not taken in good faith, or it was maybe taken under certain set of assumptions. But in reality, after we have faced ESG and net zero targets and all the promises that have been made by the big companies, we have realized that it was probably the overconfidence in the boardroom. And all of this is not backed by the solid research, regulations, um, any type of data, or what type of action plan that was prepared. And the result of this unkept promise is, of course, greenwashing. So I want to discuss the basic ESG challenges and the impact. So the biggest challenge is collection of data. So, for example, collection of data requires a lot of high quality data. We might not have the right resources to make sure that the accuracy of data is maintained, the quality of data is maintained, or the quality assurance is maintained. The effect of that is that it undermines the effectiveness of sustainable initiatives, and it makes the whole ESG risk management quite complicated. The second problem is greenwashing, because ESG has been used more as a PR tool instead of providing the honest feedback on how the company has been using their resources. So there has been a big gap between practicing and preaching. And greenwashing is when, of course, when you try to portray yourself as more environmental friendly than actually you are. Effect of all of greenwashing and other similar misrepresentations is that it undermines the trust in ESG reporting. It undermines the value creation that ESG has attached to its brand, and it leads to a lot of regulatory scrutiny, such as greenwashing provisions that may be there in different countries. Then there are some technological inefficiencies, like inadequate data, technological support. A lot of companies, even still now, you see they are using manual systems like Excel sheets, which may not be enough to handle the ESG data, because we do not even know sometimes in certain cases, we do not even know the proper unit of reporting our data in the annual reports. And there are a lot of other complex regulations which may be applicable to us, and we may not even know how to interpret those regulations to work when we are presenting our data with our stakeholders. The result of that is incomplete data and inaccuracies in our disclosures, and again, it undermines the whole process of ESG disclosures. The other problem is the lack of standardization, because there is no standardized measure for ESG success. There is no way to define whether the coverage of ESG has been perfect as per regulatory standards or not. And this lack of standardization complicates the comparisons. There is we have not achieved like an international benchmark in terms of ESG, and all types of methodologies that we have been using, and they are all inconsistent, whether you look at last year's data and this year's data or another country's data. There are other problems like a lack of tangible impact, because some people are arguing that ESG brings no meaningful environmental, social, or financial benefits. And all of these, again, lead to the skepticism of the perceived value that ESG is perceived to be attached with. There are a lot of other issues like regulatory burdens. There are a lot of regulatory requirements, like EU has CSRD or Hong Kong has Appendix 27, which are seen as overly burdensome. And I still remember a few years ago, I was watching some interview where the there's an organization of listed companies in Hong Kong, where the CEOs, the chairman said that this bringing in ESG is going to make our life much more difficult. So if on one hand, we are planning that to bring ESG at the level of bringing in more transparency. At the same time, if the stakeholders do not feel so comfortable, as the chairman of listing committees, if you feel ESG is burdensome, it may not be very motivating as a stakeholder when I see this type of reaction. So all of this leads to challenges and changes which may reduce the regulatory load on the companies and a lot of bureaucratical issues too. The other biggest problem that I felt is the problem of ESG rating providers, because every different ESG rating provider has a different methodology, different weightage that they provide to different criterias. As a result of which there is inconsistency, because sometimes certain aspects, different service providers across the world, in fact, like certain providers in the parts of Asia might weigh certain aspect, for example, diversity or board composition as a high composition, mental maybe slightly lower than that, or vice versa. So I think any type of rating provided based on this type of inconsistency is going to not going to lead us anywhere. The impact of that is evening out this type of methodology is going to bring about a change, but I'm not sure if these rating providers are honest enough to actually disclose their criteria, or I'm not sure if they really change it every time, or what type of discussions do they have with the companies before they publish their data. So the next important point is, what can the leadership, what can the regulators, what can the people who are in charge who are in charge of everything, who have the power to change everything, what can they do? So I think the important thing is to, first of all, define your company's ESG performance goals, what you are trying to achieve. And after you publish, after your disclosures, you can make a comparison with what you planned to achieve and what you actually have achieved. When you are making these disclosures, we need to make sure that the data that you are, when you are putting your goals and when you are achieving them or not achieving them, they are in the same metrics, they are in the same units, so that we are able to compare if you have actually delivered what you promised. The other important point is to have articulate clear, measurable performance targets for each ESG goal. Sometimes companies or countries like to club everything, which may not lead to proper or clear disclosures. Identifying, describing mitigation action plans for every type of ESG risks, establishing ESG frameworks, be it policies, procedures, or committees, and establishing internal processes for monitoring ESG performances. The governance questions to consider is, do we have enough subject matter experts on the board? Because as of now, if you search for ESG qualification, some universities have started with this thing called Masters in ESG, but they are actually teaching, the same thing. Most of that is just law and corporate governance. So I think there is no such thing as an ESG expert as of now. Everyone is figuring out what an ESG expert should look like, because it's a combination of compliance, law, and governance. So I think as of now, we need to realize if our approach is realistic enough, and are we able to fill in this gap of what should be and what actually is. Also, we need to ask ourselves, are we able to assess the risks in an appropriate time frame, so that when we are making these comparisons, is it actually going in our favor, or is it just a marketing ploy that I'm using just to get some better reputation for my company? Then is if ESG functions are delegated, which in my industrial experience, which I saw a lot, I saw most of the companies were actually delegating it to big fours or to consultancy firms. They were actually not doing anything. So so most of the big fours were actually directly contacting the relevant departments for all the information and data without the actual people, the management, knowing anything about it. And after everything is done, they send you the files for you to sign everything. So I think there is a big gap in the practical aspect of using ESG as making proper disclosures and just fulfilling like making it as a box ticking exercise. If the communication with our stakeholders is not concrete, if it is not based on what you really want to deliver and what actually is delivered, I think if that gap is not fulfilled, it is going to be a wastage of time for all the stakeholders. So the question is, when will we see the mirror? When will we see ESG acting or environmental issues or social issues making a strong impact? The answer is only when data becomes available. And the problem, like I discussed, is we do not know if the data is actually available because there are a lot of inaccuracies in our data. There are a lot of missing carbon targets, like I shared in the beginning of my presentation. A lot of companies have postponed their targets. So I think when we are not even able to meet the timeline, how can we compare the data? There is a big gap between what is said and what is being done. And there are a lot of development of tools to investigate all types of supply chains, and it is very difficult to get a comparison, like how have you improved your employee treatment. So there is no measurable data, how you have improved the life of your employees, how you have improved human rights, how you have tackled the risk of biodiversity or transparency in your taxation system or anti-bribery laws or board diversity. So I think there's a big gap between what is preached and what is delivered. There was another research by PwC which said that 94% of the investors say that the sustainability reporting contains unsupported claims. So I think all of this actually undermines the plan of ESG. So ESG is good, but it is not good enough because inaccuracies in its data, people are treating this as just another box ticking exercise. There's a lot of disparity between actual and presentation of data, using it again as market ploy. And like I said, a lot of resistance to ESG because most of the burden has actually come on the compliance professionals rather than the management taking all these strategic decisions about their organization. So the question is there anything that we can do? The answer is absolutely yes. It is a teamwork. Companies can standardize their reports, they can self-regulate, and they can hire ESG qualified professionals, because I think it's going to be a combination of people who understand law and data and how to extract data, because extraction of data is the biggest challenge in ESG. Avoiding greenwashing, so you understand what type of director duties you might have, what type of case laws that are running around, the litigation, the environmental NGOs that these days are hunting for directors who could be greenwashing, and enhancing the comparability. Also, for regulators, they need to adopt a phased approach, size-based phased approach, and providing clearer guidelines on reporting and understanding and adopting the fact that there is no one-size-fits-all approach initially, so that you give some time for your companies which are still in the process of growing, some breathing time to them. For investors, they should encourage meaningful disclosures rather than what the market loves, and also being more realistic in their demands. in simply boosting up the green demand may not be enough, but at the same time, making realistic green demand is I think, the need of the hour. Also, ESG rating providers, they need to form consensus amongst their community and how they are going to formulate best practices, being more transparent in their resources and sources of data, and evening out their methodologies. Thank you very much for your time. I would love to have any questions you might have for me.
Thank you so much. It was very interesting presentation. First of all, I'd like to say our distinguished speakers, if maybe you have any questions to Pooja. When you're just thinking about your question, we can't hear you. Yeah. I'd like to say that for me, this question, the topic was really interesting, and data and sustainable development, first of all, that was presented. I decided that our panel today would be the first step, maybe, for comparing different positions in different countries to make as I said at the beginning, to make the consensus maybe, yeah. And I think always about the convergence of legislation in different countries. As you said, it could be not the same position. And first of all, do you think that it's really necessary to make a general position, or maybe it's not necessary? We were speaking about BRICS countries.
Okay. I mean, theoretically, I would say yes. All of us should have like a general position, but practically speaking, I think all countries have their own problems, their own methodologies, their own different cultures, and they might have the same problems, but they are at different level of the same problem. Some countries are new with this problem. Some countries have been dealing with the same problem for some time, and some countries have probably found solutions to achieve mitigation of these problems. So I think, as good as it looks, sounds good to our ears to have one methodology, one size, which might fit all the countries in BRICS. Practically speaking, it may not be a good idea. There is a reason we are BRICS. There is a reason we have welcomed such type of diversity, where where countries from at different levels are so excited to join BRICS, and that's why we are not BRICS. We are BRICS Plus now. So I think, in my opinion, I think. We need to welcome this diversity and maintain this diversity. So for that, I do not think at this point of time, when ESG has been just introduced, we are still at an infancy of ESG, I believe. So I think if you talked to me about taxation, for example, I would say no, I don't think taxation is an even out thing for all the countries. So similarly, I think ESG is the same way. Every country should have the freedom to make their own plans and to encourage their own organizations, their own startups, and encourage their own entrepreneurs to have this freedom at the beginning. And in fact, the respective governments should provide the support. They should have this type of incubation centers to provide support for ESG. That's my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I see. By the way, at Moscow State University, we also make some attempts to launch a master program on ESG, like you said in your presentation about other countries. And it's not only about research, but also about the education. And we decided that it's really complicated, because the first question, of course, is what to fill such a program with. And you're absolutely right that in many cases, ESG effects is really different to measure. You presented your opinion about social support, and I also agree that it is extremely difficult to measure the improvement of employees' lives, for example. Yeah, this part of ESG agenda, like social, in many reports in our country and in other countries, companies write about social support. They prepare some numbers in the presentation, starting with paid vacations, I don't know, something like social support for families of employees and so on. But of course, the emotions of employees don't change and couldn't be measured. So
Yeah.
it's a global aspect. And I mean, then we are speaking about the harmonization of legislation. Maybe, first of all, kind of standards. Yeah, it's not only about the report of the company of the year, for example. Yeah, but also some standards. What should company make? And maybe we can say that BRICS plus countries could have their own. I don't know how I can explain it, their own standards, not like in all the countries worldwide, but also specifics, because we know that countries are really huge. They have a great population and they have some problems in economy, in environments here, and so on, that are the same for all the countries. But thank you for sharing your expertise. It was really interesting, and I know that in your time zone it's night even. Yeah, so thank you being here and sharing your information. Thank you so
Thank you so
much.
much. Thank you. Thank you.
And we are going to the next speaker, and we have just a moment. We have here um, um, if I may, Professor Irma, and and I think that it will be another position from another country, and the floor is yours. Please.
Okay. Thank you very much. And uh, in my country, it is 8 in the night. uh, Maybe we can say good evening for Indonesian, and good morning for distinguished moderator Professor Yulia and Professor Pooja Shukla and Professor Desiree Lynette David, my friend. Thank you very much for this opportunity. First of all, maybe I would like to introduce myself that my name is Irma Rachmawati, and I'm currently serving as senior lecturer at Universitas Pasundan, based in Bandung, Indonesia. It is a great pleasure and honor to be part of this forum today and to share inside my paper entitled Indonesia's Blue Carbon Strategy in BRICS Era, Legal Innovation and ESG integration and global market relevance. Can anyone see my slide?
I
Can,
suppose it's loading. Just in
ah,
a minute. Yeah,
ah,
it's okay. We can see the first one, introduction.
okay. Okay, thank you. Uh, Maybe let me to the introduction that Indonesia's accession to BRICS on January 2029 marks then more than a diplomatic milestone. But it also signals of the fundamental shift in our foreign policy and national development priorities. This decision reflects Indonesia's aspiration to contribute to a more inclusive multiple world such as economically, diplomatically, and environmentally. And as BRICS expand its influence, Indonesia see opportunities to deepen South cooperation and diversity partners in trade and infrastructure and energy. So we can say that BRICS as a counterbalance to the West, since BRIC has a number of members and partners, is challenge to Western financial dominance, advocating the dollarization and institutional reform such as IMF or World Bank. And in Indonesian view, membership can offer cooperation in trade, infrastructure, technology, and energy development. And let's go to the next slide. The next slide that from the view of diplomatic and environmental challenge, Indonesia must balance its independent foreign policy with a global environmental commitment under the Paris Agreement, because Indonesia is the member of Paris Agreement and SDGs, of course. So within BRICS, Indonesia has actively promoted the principle of CBDRIC, common but different stated responsibility and respective capabilities, as ethical foundation for climate justice. And this one may be increase a role in the climate diplomacy. As a member, Indonesia enables to influence the global climate governance and represent developing countries' interests. And to the reform of advocacy. However, joining BRICS also present strategic tension between maintaining a dependent active foreign policy and honoring our global environmental obligation under Paris Agreement and SDGs. And we have wanted to access the uh, green technology financing. As a full BRICS membership, enhance the pathway for financing energy transition, technology transfer, and institutional capacity building. So we believe that it needs the strategic balance, Indonesia-based balance economic cooperation with environmental diplomacy to stay on course with the decarbonization goals. And this, the focus of the study is how Indonesia leverage BRICS on ESG and climate issues and its impact on national and global climate change, climate policy. And Indonesia uh, has a unique blue carbon potential. With vast coastal ecosystem, Indonesia can lead the global blue carbon initiative through BRICS and ESG cooperation. But we have the challenge because of our forest resources and climate paradox. Despite having until more than 130 million area of tropical forests, deforestation remains a major contributor to the greenhouse gas emission. So one of Indonesia's bold step has been the formal establishment of IDX Carbon in 2023. It is a legally structured national carbon exchange where carbon units are classified as securities, not commodities. And uh, this sets Indonesia different from the either European nation or United States models and positions under a pioneer among the global South nation. And this IDX platform enhance Indonesia's voice in global climate governance, representing the interests of developing countries. And uh, the next is the uh, what is the mean of the IDX regulation? The IDX regulation is the Indonesian nation system, and we have the global carbon market tends to prefer carbon credits, as I've said before, and but we have some challenges. There are we have a dual classification between financial and environmental creates it's create the legal ambiguity and overlap between the uh, finance that agency and environmental agency in Indonesia, and it is limited inclusion for local communities or indigenous actors, and the risk of uh, IDX is the greenwashing, such the one or the issue that Pooja has been mentioned in her presentation. Why? Because Indonesia has their own standard, namely as an or national standard. It faces barriers to acceptance in international market. However, it's making it necessary to pursue the harmonization effort or joining labeling scheme between national standard and international standard, because as we know we have the global markets refer to carbon credits recognized by international standard, such as Vera or gold standard. It is very different in Indonesia, and it's will be leads to double counting and greenwashing. And what is the question for the paper? The first is how can Indonesia legal and policy approach support the development of blue carbon, align the global carbon market under BRICS cooperation, and how can Indonesia use its BRICS membership to strengthen climate diplomacy and promote fair and inclusive carbon governance to be global south. And maybe I can skip the one and let me continue to the discussion. The first discussion, Indonesia's legal and policy approach to blue carbon in BRICS context. Indonesia holds million hectare of mangrove, storing over 3 billion ton of carbon dioxide. This is the picture of the mangrove forest in Papua, Indonesia. And uh, the Papua and Kalimantan are the largest contribution. And we have local best practices in Pejarakan, Bali, and Indramayu in West Java, serve a community-based model of blue carbon conservation with socio-economic benefit. This is the picture of uh, mangrove forest in Pejarakan, Bali, in Bali Island, and the government uh, n- made it to the ecotourism, and it's very famous in Indonesia and very global. And the policy innovation to IDX Carbon, Indonesia carbon units are legally classified as securities, not commodities, and the leadership, and we can say this is the Indonesia is a leader among the global south because the regulation and the market advantages, legal clarity enables structured trading and carbon derivative and transparent participation, and also it enhances the credibility in international climate uh, finance. This is the mangrove forest in Strait of Malacca. Yeah. Uh, and but we have, as I mentioned before, we have the risk and criticism because it is overlap between financial and environmental regulatory bodies, and the potential risks include greenwashing, double counting, and delisting. Greenwashing occurs when carbon trading is misused, and the risk of double counting worsen the situation by creating of the illusion of emission reduction that are not actually happening. Indonesia must avoid both greenwashing and double counting to ensure that IDX carbon gains recognition in the global market. So it is very essential to pursue the mutual recognition with international standards such as FERA or global standard. And the national registry Indonesia must be integrated and be monitored based on the principle of transparency, integrity, and accountability. And then let's go to the next. This is the potential of the blue carbon and key project areas. There are some islands in Indonesia, Papua, West Kalimantan, and North Java Coast and Bali Island. And this is the benefit is the high biodiversity and then indigenous participation, such as in Papua, and carbon storage and community income in West Kalimantan, and then coastal projection and local livelihood in North Java Coast, and ecotourism and blue carbon offset in Bali Pajarakan or Bali Island. This is the comparative between BRICS country. Uh, and in Indonesia, the classification of carbon is as security, and the coverage is energy, forestry, and private offset. In China, and this is mentioned as commodity, with the coverage sector in power generation only. And India, this is a community for industrial sector. In Brazil, uh, is it between security and commodity for industrial emission. And South Africa, this is also commodity for fossil fuels and industry. And let's go to the second question uh, on leveraging BRICS member for climate diplomacy and inclusive carbon governance. The strategy value of BRICS membership. Now, Indonesia as a full BRICS member marks a turning point in its climate diplomacy and over access to regional and global climate governance, root in global South cooperation. And in legal institutional strains, through IDX Carbon, Indonesia possesses the legal tools and credibility to influence the regional carbon standard, and then a certification norm and the market trust. Um, BRICS as climate governance uh, platform. It holds a potential of a climate leadership coalition for the global south, and for the Indonesia's diplomatic role. Indonesia drive the harmonization of technical framework and promote the nature-based climate solution. And what is the strategy for Indonesia in for Indonesia climate diplomatic BRICS. I have some table shown the registry harmonization and then mutual recognition agreement or MLR and joint blue carbon standard and BRICS ESG working group and just transmission fund framework. And uh, let me share the registry or harmonization. The registry harmonization means that Indonesia has a significant system, namely system registry national or national registration. Uh, this is with BRICS registration and global standard. I mean, Indonesia must harmonize the standard of national registration with BRICS and global standards such as VERA or gold standard. It is essential to gain international credibility for Indonesian carbon unit. Without interoperability, Indonesian credit may face acceptance barrier in the global market. And what is the challenge? The challenge is different in carbon unit classification because, for example, Security Indonesia carbon is a security in Indonesia, but in China or South Africa, carbon is a commodities, and it's create legal and technical mismatch. Moreover, the harmonization requires strong institutional capacity and data transparency. And the potential strategy, Indonesia can act as bridge between voluntary global standard and national uh, registry, providing a hybrid model of trust and sovereignty. And then for the mutual recognition agreement or MLR, Indonesia MLR would allow Indonesia carbon credits to be recognized across the BRICS jurisdiction. But the challenge establishing MLR involve not only technical equivalence but also diplomatic alignment. And the strategic potential, Indonesia has a legal clarity position to lead the development of legal binding MLR as regional norm setter and join the blue uh, carbon standard. The significant proposing united standard for blue carbon, such as mangrove or seagrass, is a must, and it is will solidify Indonesia's niche leadership in nature-based solution. And the challenge, the scientific methodologies for blue carbon are less mature than terrestrial heads project. And the strategical potential, Indonesia can position itself as a technical governor and use BRICS to mobilize joint financing to pilot blue carbon project under harmonized framework. And this is the hope from the BRICS ESG working group. This Indonesia can make the working group to align ESG indicator and monitoring system, enhance investor confidence, and then the challenge ESG framework vary significantly across BRICS and data enforcement and political will are uneven. Furthermore, some BRICS countries are skeptical of Western defined ESG metrics. And sorry if I mistaken. And the strategic potential, Indonesia can push a decolonial ESG model, blending local value with global standard, creating a unique narrative. And then just the transition. This is the island of Labuan Bajo, the picture. And the just transition fund framework. This is very significant to creating fund targeted at smallholder, indigenous people, and coastal community addresses the often overlooked social dimension of carbon governance. But the challenge, mobilizing and managing climate finance is very complex, and there is a risk of elite capture and misallocation and inadequate monitoring of benefit. The strategic potential, if managed transparently, the fund could become a showcase in inclusive climate finance or blueprints or for other global south country under BRICS cooperation. So this is the conclusion for this paper. For the conclusion is uh, the legal innovation position Indonesia by launch of IDX Carbon. Uh, yeah, have the some legal challenge such as the of dual classification and overlap between financial service authority and environmental agencies, and the limited inclusion of local communities and risk of greenwashing and double counting. However, the long-term success of this initiative depends on Indonesia's ability to harmonize domestic regulation with international standard. This study highlighted the three strategic priorities. The first is legal effectiveness and optimizing blue carbon potential and diplomatic leverage between BRICS. With the rapid growth of IDX Carbon and its strategic in present in BRICS, and Indonesia is well positioned to help shape a new, just, and market responsible global carbon governance architect. However, this opportunity requires continued legal reform, institutional and capacity building, and proactive and adaptive climate diplomacy agenda. In closing, Indonesia's engagement with BRICS, it's not just about economic realignment, but it also about shaping a more inclusive and approach to climate governance by combining legal innovation, blue carbon leadership, and regional cooperation. And Indonesia is ready to lead in the global transition towards sustainability. Thank you again to the Professor Yulia as moderator and the organizing committee and the participant for your attention and thoughtful engagement. I looking forward to your sites and any question you may have. Thank you very much. That's all for my question presentation.
Thank you so much, Professor Irma. It was really interesting, especially for me, because some years before my colleague from China and me, we prepared some really not so huge research about blue carbon strategy and greenhouse gas emission in Russia and China. And part of my questions that the raw and actually relevant to these days you shared in your presentation and answered part of this question. But the problem of the blue carbon strategy are both international and local. I mean that I really grateful to you. Then you try to explain how it works in some BRIC countries. And I'd like to say that in our country, in Russia, they have a company, Norilsk Nickel, and it's company that issues such tokens to attract investments in Russia under the rules of Russian jurisdictions. It wasn't in your table, so maybe it will be interesting for you too, for your research. We have a law on digital financial assets, and this law, this act, regulates the creation of special digital platforms under the control of the Central Bank of Russia, and it works like the platform for uh, token emissions. And we also know that such tokens of Russian company were previously traded on international crypto platforms. I'm not sure that now it's possible too, but I think that it's an international problem. You said that in different jurisdiction, carbon credits are looks like the object, yeah, of circulation. And after all, on the one hand, in Russian law, we're discussing the problem of property component of the token, because it's not the same like also property, yeah. But on the other hand, it's a credit trading, and within the state control some specific right maybe on the part of the company who tried to sell or to buy it. Perhaps this can become one of the direction of convergence on the legislation of the BRICS countries as a basic for attracting investments in solving the problem of environmental protection. And I think that in doctrine it can remain original, as our previous speaker pointed, but in regulation it is necessary, I think, to look for general bullet points in order to give an opportunity to develop not only the concept but also for business, yeah, because it's really important to the entrepreneurship. And from the proposal of standards, we can go deeper and create common development institutions. And also, it's interesting for me. Do you think it's possible after these standards you presented uh, to make some maybe international agreement or something like this to skip the problems you pointed in your presentation?
Yes, okay. Thank you very much for your insightful comment for my presentation. I believe that uh, yeah, developing BRICS or blue carbon standard is our hope, maybe for Indonesian view, because we hope maybe in the future we have the BRICS carbon standard similar to FERA or gold standard, and adapted to legal ecosystem to harmonize the international and national differential law. We can establish a mutual recognition agreement between national registries, and of course it must align to the Paris Agreement, Article number 6, on carbon markets and international cooperation. So yeah, I hope this encourage to the international level to build a coherence across BRICS regarding the blue carbon. That's all for my answer for your question, Prof. Yulia.
Mhm. Thank you so much. And dear colleagues, just what I'm not against the common agenda for all the countries in the world. I think that for our discussion today, maybe it's interesting to point attention to our countries and think about what they can suggest, what we can, I don't know, prefer to do, yeah, to make it real, first of all, from the point of view of environmental problems. And thank you so much for sharing your presentation. And we are going to the next speaker. Thank you for being here. It's Desiree Lynette David, lecturer at Nelson Mandela University, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I just am trying to share my slides with you. Are you able to see my presentation yet?
Haven't yet.
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay. Uh, okay, just let me get that.
Have your time. It's okay.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. Okay, here we go. Okay, it should be uploading. Okay, so thank you very much for inviting me, and it's been so interesting listening to the other speakers. And part of my presentation, Prof. Yulia, is or one of the things that I would mention is the fact that having a general global agenda and agreement is the ideal situation. But because the BRICS countries are so vast and so diverse, from their socio-economic to political and cultural and all the other aspects that make each country unique, um, it becomes such a balancing act between uh, putting all of those things into perspective and looking out for the bigger picture, which benefits everybody in any event. But what I want to speak about, and I see that my slides are now visible, is the role that states can play in harmonizing environmental approaches in the BRICS plus countries. So Pooja went into quite a bit of detail in her presentation about ESG and what each of those aspects entail. So I'm not going to be spending too much of time on that. But if you just look at the statistics in the slide, you'll see that the percentages of the population, the percentages of carbon emissions, and so on, are really aspects that one needs to look at with regard to each of the priorities that the different members of the BRICS Plus community has to consider when making policy decisions and when binding ourselves to these global decision making or decisions that are taken. And so the key issues that I've tried to divide my presentation into is to look at the diverse regulatory frameworks and enforcement capacities across the BRICS Plus nations. As Irma mentioned that, or it could have been Pooja, sorry, I've been listening so intently. Some countries are much further in their journey with regard to establishing the regulatory mechanisms, and are much further with regard to how successful these are. So you have certain of the countries who are basically just beginning on that journey, or who are at a very primary level of establishing frameworks, or even coming to decisions with regard to what kind of regulatory frameworks need to be in place within that specific country, taking into account, as I've said, the socioeconomic conditions, the like, for example, in South Africa, the levels of unemployment, the levels of poverty, the cultural diversity, cultural issues, and we saw a lot of those come out in the cases that went before court when environmental matters had to be considered by the courts. Then, of course, we have the other issue of limited cross-border alignment in environmental standards and data sharing. And we've already heard from the earlier speaker about the manner in which the data is collected, or the criteria that is used in order to collect the data, interpreting the data, and so on. And once again, if you're looking at cross-border alignment, there may be different priorities for the different countries with regard to environmental matters and the other issues that I've mentioned. So this makes it much more difficult to, even within a specific country, come up with the regulatory framework. But if we're talking about aligning cross-border, then the difficulties that arise in just on a very basic level, not looking at the political differences and ideologies and so on that may inform the agreements and the decision making at a cross-border level. And then, of course, the need for sustainable finance and technology transfer. And this has been spoken about in this session already. These decisions need to be properly informed, and there needs to be a proper means of sharing information, using technology to disseminate the information, both financial information as well as in other fields. And so this also becomes an issue then. And then, of course, you've got to look at balancing your development goals with ecological preservation. And the cases that I will refer to in the course of my presentation deal more with this fourth point of how a country, and in the broader picture, how states would go about balancing your development goals with ecological preservation. Coming from the background of South Africa, where we have such ecological biodiversity with regard to our animal species, our marine life, our plant species, some of which are only found in this area of the world. And I'm speaking specifically with regard to some of the traditional medicinal herbs of the indigenous people, and so on. So these are very specific aspects in the South African context. But I think you can extend it to the other BRICS plus countries who potentially could be facing similar issues and having to make decisions based on similar factors. So, with the participation of states and the role that states play in these environmental decision-making processes. If you look at the BRICS plus countries, given their growing geopolitical influence, and we've seen that we now not just BRICS anymore, but we are BRICS plus, and BRICS plus is becoming more and more attractive to more countries, as well as the shared environmental challenges that the different countries will face. It becomes necessary to attempt to achieve a coordinated state action in order to achieve sustainable development. I think in every category or in every field that we are dealing with at an international level, it can't be done, or global level. There's got to be some kind of coordination, some kind of plan, some kind of process, so that we're not working at odds, so that everyone is properly aligned, and that you are able to have a start point at an end and an end point. So there is a goal that everyone is working towards. And this is why it is so essential that there is coordinated state action on the issue of sustainable development. So what I'm going to be looking at is some of the mechanisms through which these policies, including the domestic policies, can be aligned when trying to achieve the environmental commitments that as states we have. So the BRICS plus grouping, which obviously comprises Brazil, Russia, China, India, South Africa, and then the other emerging partners like Indonesia, for example, who's represented here today. These countries represent a significant share of the global population. If you look at just the original BRICS group and you looked at the population of that original group, it was quite sizable. Now you have the other partners that are joining the BRICS plus grouping. So you're looking at a very large percentage of the population across the board. So whether you are a developed or a developing country, you'd be represented in that BRICS plus grouping. And of course, with that, um, 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 you have a significant um, GDP, a significant GDP that you're working with, but you also have a significant amount of greenhouse gas emissions from the countries that are part of this particular grouping, given that certain countries like South Africa, for example, is very heavily coal reliant, and the emissions from those activities significantly contribute to the gas emissions around the world. But despite very diverse political systems and development trajectories, these BRICS plus nations face a common environmental pressure. And this would include things like pollution, like biodiversity loss, climate vulnerability. So, in a country like Indonesia, for example, um, you have a vulnerability because of your coastal, your coastline, which is extensive, and you would be, as with South Africa, we saw in the last 3 years with we had um, vast areas of prime beachfront properties being swept away literally by unprecedented rainfall that we've had in those areas in that particular period of time. Also with our coastlines, because we are so dependent on the income from our ocean activities. Um, with climate change and the loss of biodiversity, it has a direct impact on the fishing industry, for example, in South Africa. And that not only affects the GDP of our country specifically, but it comes right down to whether there is food on the table of the crew on fishing vessels who would have been responsible or would have been employed in that kind of situation. Um, we've seen biodiversity loss because of things like the impact of global warming, but also there's this tension between development to increase things like employment, where we have like a 35 to 40% rate of unemployment among the youth of South Africa. So there's a need for development, which requires new buildings, new industries, and so on. But there's also then what it means is that you are destroying, and it's a harsh word to use, but I will use it in any event. You are destroying the habitat and the natural biodiversity. Yes, of course, we have legislation that requires you to do environmental impact assessments and all the studies and so on. But we have seen, and there have been a number of cases before the courts, where the state departments themselves, who are responsible for granting permits and for objectively applying their minds to these environmental impact assessments and studies and so on that have been done, who have not come to the who have not come to the table with clean hands, and where proper procedures are not being followed. In South Africa, as with some of the other countries in the BRICS Plus grouping, corruption is a huge problem. And so that once again contributes to the problems that affect the environment and the environmental integrity of our country, but then also by implication other states as well. And so, if you are able to, or you would want to have a system where there is some kind of uniformity in the manner in which you are approaching these. So there needs to be some kind of harmonization with regard to the processes and procedures, especially where you have states that have similar types of issues that are facing them. So, for example, South Africa and Indonesia, and I do quite a bit of work with Professor Irma's colleague Lenny, and in a different field. So, with regard to sexual violence and sexual offences and so on. But what you find when there is this working together is that with all the differences and so on, there are so many commonalities, and there's so much to be learned from from having that kind of interaction, and from measuring the standards that you are using and the processes that you are using against the best practices from other states, from other jurisdictions, and so on. And so it becomes, I think, so important. And I've always been one who has actively in promoted or wanted to be engaged in this kind of cross cultural, cross country, cross state interactions, because it leads to a better understanding not only of the situation of a different country or a different state, but also introspectively, it gives you a better understanding, I think, of your own situation and the issues that you are facing in these kind of situations. So, if we look at policy coordination and standardization, which is, I think, or which would be the end goal or the sort of ideal if we're looking at this question from the perspective of the different states, then what are some of the issues that we should be concentrating on or focusing on? And one of the state's fundamental roles is to create and implement coherent environmental policies. And as I've mentioned, some of the states will be more advanced than some of the others. So, for example, in South Africa, we have um, a number of pieces of legislation specifically created to enhance environmental activities and so on, because our constitution in South Africa makes specific mention of a right to the environment. So it provides that everyone has a right to the environment. It talks about the right to the environment to promote the health and well-being of each individual. It talks about holding the environment in stewardship for future generations, so that future generations um, 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 have access to an environment that is beneficial to their health and well-being, but enjoys them to allows them to have use and enjoyment of that environment as well, which I think was quite innovative, if not maybe a pipe dream sometimes, to include that as one of the human rights in the Constitution. And from that section in the Constitution, um, uh, the Constitution also provides that legislation must be enacted in order to give effect to the right to the environment, which then saw the plethora of legislation that came in the wake of the Constitution to provide mechanisms and procedures to be put in place so that the right to the environment could be protected for present and future generations. So, obviously, we have experienced some issues with, as I've mentioned, we have corruption in South Africa. So a lot of times the safeguards that are put in place in the legislation don't actually work as safeguards, because what we have is the fox in the hen house when it comes to some of our politicians and those in power, which I'm embarrassed to say is what we see in a lot of the matters that do go to court. Sometimes you have officials, maybe not very highly ranked, but who do not do due diligence when it comes to ensuring that the environmental imperatives are met when it comes to reviewing the documentation that needs to be submitted. Very often it's just a tick box kind of exercise without actually making sure that the aims of the legislation have been carried out. We saw this in a very uh, well-known South African case that was heard in my province about 2 or 3 years ago. It's referred to as the Shell case. But what had happened in this case was the multinational petroleum company Shell wanted to engage in some offshore drilling off our coastline. And they ostensibly had all the permits and went through all the proper procedures and so on. But what it was found when the matter went to court was that there wasn't proper consultation with the community members. The community members weren't even given an opportunity to actively participate in the whole process, because it was an indigenous community that was affected. The advertisements and the notices were placed in an English-speaking newspaper, which is not the language of the community. So on paper, it was wonderful. All the processes were followed and so on. And the report that came out said that it would benefit the community. But the court found that in that case, although on the face of it, it seemed as though the proper procedures had been followed, clearly, if one looked further into that, then it was not done in a proper way, because the community, although, yes, we advertised, so consultation was done, there was no consultation, because the community, because of the language barrier, was not aware of what was happening. And they found out basically when it was close to actually getting the movement off. And that was one of the cases that really galvanized the country. And I think that case showed us that public participation is so important. Public participation must go with state decision making and so on. Another thing that happened in that case, just off the top of my head, to give you an example, was that the report said that the community would benefit. And that was one of the requirements from a legislative point of view, that the envisaged activity had to benefit the community. But the company that provided the report was not able to satisfy the court or explain or give any information or details as to how the community would be benefited. So it was just the community would benefit without any actual indication to the court as to what form the benefit would take, how the benefit would be would make its way to the community and so on. So, although it's wonderful to, although it's important that you have to have these policies and so on in place, there also must be the role players must have the will to make sure that um, um, the the um, what is the word to make sure that um, the objects of the policies and the procedures are actually met, and that is not just a tick box exercise that ultimately has a detrimental effect both on the community and the society that is on the environment and the society that forms part of that environment. Um, Another aspect to consider is that the BRICS plus countries must navigate domestic priorities while contributing to global sustainability goals. And once again, to use South Africa as an example, we have a large number, a very high percentage of unemployment. We have socioeconomic issues that cover things like education and healthcare and social security and so on. So the when you are hungry or when you don't have access to education, talking about this thing called the environment that you maybe are not educated enough to see goes beyond the trees and the river in your community and that kind of thing. It is a big thing. Okay. So obviously, different countries or the different states will have different domestic issues that need to be dealt with. In South Africa, we have things like housing, where there's a lack of housing. So you have um, uh, hundreds of thousands of people who don't have access to proper housing, who don't have access to proper water, who don't have access to a toilet or to electricity and so on. And so it becomes a balancing act with regard to in our policy making. Um, do we look at the environment and these things as separate issues, or must we consider these issues and these things? Must they be prioritized over the environment, or do we find a way to include them in the environmental issues that need to be considered? And this, I think, is not a solely South African problem. I think with most of the countries, there is some domestic issue that must be navigated as part of these sustainability goals. And with these, it's not just with regard to the environment, but with the other sustainability goals as well. So this is a difficult task for a state to get right individually in itself. But then if you look at it on the global stage, to then move it into the global spectrum where you have your different states with different issues, domestic issues, and therefore different priorities. Um, how do you um, mediate an outcome or come to a resolution as to what can we do on a global platform that will serve the interests generally of all your member countries. Also, states act as regulators when setting national standards for air and water quality, waste management, biodiversity protection, and so on. And once again, coordinating these standards across borders um, um, can reduce policy fragmentation, and so on. But you also have to have, when you're dealing with this, the goodwill of all the member states that are involved in these. So I think the goal, or you have to have that common goal, and there should not be vested interests, although there probably will be vested interests in a lot of these cases. But those vested interests need to, I think, be weighed against the good of all the states or all the entities involved in that. And then you have your mechanisms such as mutual recognition of environmental impact assessments and the development of shared policy frameworks and so on. And these are key to these types of endeavors. If you're looking at environmental diplomacy and multilateral engagements, um, we've seen that BRICS plus states have increasingly used environmental diplomacy to advance the shared interests that they've had. So, this is an advantage, I think, that we have as BRICS nations working together, um, is that we've sort of already got into the habit of using environmental diplomacy in our interactions with other states. So, by coordinating positions in global forums like the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change and the Convention on Biological Diversity, just to name two of them, states can advocate for equitable climate finance and differentiated responsibilities. We've seen sometimes that certain states with a lot of self interest have stubbornly refused to be part um, um, of these processes and so on. But for the most part, I think the BRICS plus states have been very have been very open to using environmental diplomacy when it comes to these matters. Um, Another thing that comes out of this is that you have the formation of collective negotiating blocks um, that can strengthen their influence on global environmental governance, especially when you have certain states who may be not as large or don't have a louder voice as other states, where you have, if they form part of a collective negotiation bloc, then their voice becomes stronger and they're part of a larger collective when it comes to ensuring that they do have some influence on global environmental government, and to ensure that as part of that bloc, their interests or they are receiving environmental justice when it comes to dealing with their issues. Um, Financing and investment mobilization, um, a huge issue for the different states is the unequal access to financial resources. And states can address this by facilitating green finance through national development banks and subsidies and so on. Um, you have state led initiatives for clean energy and sustainable practices that we are seeing in a number of countries that seem to have some impact. So, these are some of the initiatives that can be made use of. And also, you have technology transfer and capacity building. Technological collaboration is essential for bridging the capability gaps amongst the BRICS plus countries. So, training programs, knowledge exchanges, digital structures supported by the greater collective. Um, and innovation that can be shared amongst the different member states can only be of benefit. Forums like these that promote joint research, development, deployment of sustainable technologies in areas like renewable energy and water treatment and waste to energy conversion. These are all technologies that can be shared in order to build capacity of those states that perhaps are lagging behind a little bit when it comes to these particular matters. And then, as with anything, there needs to be monitoring, there needs to be compliance, and there needs to be some way of ensuring there's compliance. But most importantly, there must be transparency in the procedure. So states are responsible, obviously, for ensuring their policy implementation through monitoring and compliance mechanisms. Um, you need to have harmonized data platforms and joint environmental monitoring systems that will better enable tracking of pollution, deforestation, climate impacts, not just for the state itself, but for neighboring states and for other states that may be impacted or that may benefit from having access to these data platforms so that it can inform their own decision making and activities. And then open access, obviously, to environmental data and citizen engagement management as a means to enhance transparency and accountability, so that it's not just a selected few that have access to this information and this data, so that you have your civil society and other institutions, not state influenced, that are able to engage in activism in areas where the state falls short. And obviously, a key challenge for the BRICS states is to integrate environmental protection with socio-economic development, as I mentioned earlier, especially in a country like South Africa, where there are these challenges. It is imperative that the state does attempt to integrate environmental protection with socioeconomic development. So, states must ensure, for example, that green transitions are just and inclusive. They need to address the needs of vulnerable populations and support populations. Support employment in sustainable sectors, and obviously, national development strategies must incorporate climate resilience, biodiversity, conservation, and so on in their in their policies. So obviously, if you look at the little infographic that's on screen, you've got your policy coordination, you have your institutional governance, you have your green economy, diplomatic leadership, and public engagement, all of which need to be implemented and need to be at the forefront of ensuring that environmental issues are tackled and that these issues are tackled for the benefit of um, each state. So to conclude, I just want to say that when we look at the harmonization of environmental approaches across BRICS, these are not only desirable, but they are necessary in the face of shared ecological threats and global interdependence, because we don't operate as an island. There is an astounding amount of global interdependence, not just from financial in financial situations, but in any sphere that you can think of. And so the state is central to this process. And by acting as a policy coordinator, a diplomat, a financier, an innovator, a guardian of equity, the state can play a huge role in ensuring that there is not only environmental justice, but that it contributes to the greater picture of not just ensuring environmental justice, but all other aspects that may depend on environmental justice. And so, by the states leveraging their collective strengths and aligning national actions with regional and global goals, the BRICS plus states can lead the transition towards a greener and more sustainable future. And I thank you so much for your attention and for the opportunity to address you.
Thank you so much. This expertise, this presentation was really touching for me. You see, I absolutely agree with you that environmentalism is for wealthy people. I absolutely agree. And in Russian legislation, we have such discussion and such problem. Then some years before, they had the necessary characteristics of investment, like social positive effect of the investment for all the businesses. And now we have just position about positive effect, and we see that it's not enough in real situation, according when we speak about environmental problems. Dear colleagues, I'd like to have a discussion with all of you. I have many insights after your presentation, but it's necessary to stop it now. And I'd like to say that harmonization of legislation is a convergence of legislations aimed at establishing similar regulation, and it's really the problem, not like the spontaneous position. It's a will of countries and also of lawyers, of businesses, of society, and at the same time, harmonization of legislation can be both purposeful and spontaneous too. And I wish us, all of us, to achieve this convergence, this harmonization of law, and thank the distinguished speakers for participating in this conversation and promoting not only environmental diplomacy, as said my colleagues, but also academic diplomacy that allows scholars to build a common vision in different spheres. Thank you so much, and stay in touch, dear colleagues.
Thank you.
Thank you.